Beneath the shimmering gold of the Hollywood sign, we've been sold a lie of vertical perfection. We see leading men as towering titans, imposing giants who command every inch of the silver screen. But if you look just below the frame, the gods start to look a lot more human. The truth is buried in the floorboards. It's a world of apple boxes hidden behind mahogany desks, trenches dug into the dirt so a co-star doesn't look too tall, and camera angles rigged to defy the laws of physics. This isn't a story about cinematic legends. It's a story about architectural magicians, men trading their dignity for a few extra inches of plywood. From secret lifts to scandals that would make modern tabloids melt down, we're pulling back the curtain on the industry's shortest secrets.
Why my name, Richard?
Because you're getting on that plane.
I don't understand. What about you?
I'm staying here with him till the plane gets safely away.
No.
Humphrey Bogart stepped into the frame on a wooden box because Golden Age Hollywood expected men to look tough and dominate the screen the second they walked in. This town was built on an illusion where masculinity could be adjusted with lighting angles and the occasional piece of furniture. In January of 1942, on the set of Casablanca, Ingrid Bergman stood in her heels looking elegant and unmistakably taller than her co-star. Bogart was cast as the ultimate cool American hero, but he suddenly had a visual problem that could not be fixed by rewriting the script. Someone quietly slid a plain wooden box under his feet, and once the cameras rolled, that imbalance vanished and Rick Blaine was born. That box never really went away, following him from Casablanca to The Big Sleep and becoming a silent partner in his career. Crew members jokingly called it the Bogart box, and while he despised the idea of standing on a prop to look like a man, he understood the rules of the studio. Press sheets inflated his height while interviews were staged, so he always sat higher than his guests, and the cameras were always positioned with surgical care. The audience never noticed a thing because when Bogart entered a room, his gravelly voice and effortless authority made you feel his presence before you could measure his height. Hollywood pulled off a massive trick by turning an average-sized man into a towering legend, ensuring that Bogart was never small on screen.
What is old? A dog dies at 14. And tortoises live over 100.
Kirk Douglas was the gladiator who refused to look small, knowing that being a leading man meant more than just having charisma. At 5 feet 8 inches, he wasn't short by real-world standards, but a Hollywood obsessed with 6-foot heroes made him feel like he was bringing a knife to a gladiator fight. This problem exploded in 1960 on the blistering hot set of Spartacus, where Douglas looked human next to Roman guards built like marble statues. Director Stanley Kubrick wasn't having it and ordered trenches to be dug into the ground, so the extras stood lower while Douglas remained on level ground. Cameras tilted low, and lenses stretched to make the rebel leader look larger than life, though Douglas hated the implication of these tricks. Off-camera, he was famously sensitive about his height and once snapped at a crew member before walking off set when they suggested a booster box. He believed size was something you fought for through sheer force of will and an explosive temper. But he stood tall where it actually mattered. Douglas publicly credited blacklisted writer Dalton Trumbo for the film, and although that defiance cost him power and friends, he never needed camera tricks to stand tall on principle.
Why didn't you ever tell me?
Tell you what.
I believe you're in some sort of trouble.
Alan Ladd looked like the perfect American hero with his ice blue eyes and quiet confidence, playing gunfighters who never needed to raise their voice to command a room. In films like Shane, he was controlled and deadly calm, but the illusion required serious engineering because Ladd stood around 5 feet 6 inches. Studio paperwork often listed him as being much taller, depending on how optimistic the publicist felt that day. To keep him from looking small next to co-stars like Van, Heflin and Jack Palance, crews dug fresh holes half a meter deep every single day. Ladd stood on solid ground while everyone else sank lower, just out of frame, and the studio even avoided casting actresses taller than 5 feet 4 inches to keep the image intact. Blocking was rehearsed like choreography to ensure he remained a towering icon, but off-screen, that fragile image ate at him. Friends recalled him drinking heavily at parties while standing alone and listening to whispers he pretended not to hear. By the early 1960s, the pressure of alcohol and exhaustion caught up to him, and he was found dead in his Palm Springs home at 50 years old. Hollywood whispered dark theories about his accidental overdose, suggesting the man who played strength through silence spent his life standing in holes carved deep inside himself.
Tip of your toes to your head. You look like an unmade bed.
Frank Sinatra arrived in every room with a voice as smooth as whiskey and an ego large enough to rent its own hotel suite. In a town full of 6-foot leading men, Sinatra stood at about 5'7", which felt like a misdemeanor in Hollywood. He ordered custom elevator shoes with 2 full inches of hidden lift and allegedly asked for lead weights in the soles so he wouldn't bounce when he walked. Nothing kills tough guy credibility faster than looking like a parade balloon, but his legendary temper only got worse as columnists mocked his height. Witnesses claimed Ava Gardner once mocked him for being unable to reach a top kitchen shelf, and a wine glass did not survive that argument. Sinatra eventually powered through the ridicule with darker film roles and Vegas dominance until club owners didn't care how tall he was. He turned his insecurity into intimidation. And even though he needed lifts to reach eye level, everyone else looked up to him anyway.
Come out and take it, you dirty yellow-bellied rat, or I'll give it to you through the door.
James Cagney was proof that size doesn't matter unless you let it, standing at 5'5" and looking more like a street kid than a fearsome gangster. The moment he exploded onto the screen, audiences forgot all about inches because he detonated like a firecracker in a tailored suit. Warner Brothers used risers, shadowy lighting, and press releases that generously bumped his height to make their toughest gangster look the part. Sometimes they planted him next to shorter actors, but his kinetic rage and sharp dialogue usually did the trick without extra help. Off-screen, his insecurity simmered, and he allegedly charged an assistant director who made the mistake of calling him a little guy. Rumors swirled that he looked into a medieval-sounding leg-lengthening surgery involving broken bones and metal frames, though nothing was ever confirmed. He eventually stopped fighting the label and turned his compact frame into a weapon that made Hollywood nervous.
Mr. Norton, first thing that struck me was that suicide act.
Edward G. Robinson did not look like a crime boss with his short, stocky frame and round face, but his voice hit like a brick to the face. Hollywood still panicked, lowering the cameras and raising his chairs so he wouldn't look like a kid who wandered into the wrong movie. Studio executives obsessed over inches while Robinson just showed up and scared the life out of everyone with illegal-feeling eye contact. Off-screen, the man who played ruthless gangsters was a culture gentleman who collected fine art and hosted elegant dinner parties. Guests would sip wine beneath million-dollar paintings while whispering about how they wished he were taller, but politics finished what his height couldn't. During the Red Scare, he was dragged before the government and accused of leftist sympathies, which caused his roles to vanish overnight. Robinson proved that you can dominate the screen without height, but being small is unforgivable in Hollywood when the political mood changes. Charlie Chaplin was tiny, but he was unstoppable on screen with a mustache that carried more charisma than most leading men. At around 5'5", he turned smallness into a superpower through timing and emotion, and audiences. Never once thought about his height. Off-screen, he was a walking scandal factory who secretly married 16-year-old Lita Gray in 1924 to avoid criminal charges. Hollywood froze as the wedding was rushed across the Mexican border, but his status as a rich genius meant people forgave his bad decisions. That image shattered when a paternity suit turned into a media circus, and even though blood tests proved he wasn't the father, the court ordered him to pay anyway. Public opinion turned him from a beloved clown into a creepy headline almost overnight. His height never limited his art, but his appetites proved that a small man can still cast a shadow big enough to darken an entire era.
Just pray that I die bravely.
You will not die. You'll not have to fight him. Griswold.
Danny Kaye was pure kinetic energy who machine-gunned syllables at bystanders and radiated joy in movies like White Christmas. At around 5'7", he wasn't towering, but he moved so fast that audiences didn't have time to measure him before he tap-danced out of frame. Studios loved him because his smaller stature made him feel like a non-threatening, goofy friend who could steal every scene. Behind that smile, whispers followed him for decades about a secret romantic relationship with Laurence Olivier, which was career poison in the 1950s. He smiled harder and said nothing to protect his career, but friends described a man who was tightly controlled and lonely off stage. He proved that sometimes the funniest man in the room is working the hardest to keep the joke from turning serious. Sammy Davis Jr. was about 5'3", and he made his situation harder by being black, Jewish, and completely unafraid to steal the spotlight. He attacked his performances with singing and dancing that moved so fast your eyes couldn't stay still long enough to measure him. In 1960, he tested America's patience by marrying a tall, blonde, white actress, which resulted in death threats and empty venues across the South. Time magazine called him the smallest man to start a massive cultural fistfight, and the pressure drove him toward cocaine and booze. After a near-fatal car crash, he used humor to survive, joking about his height and his standing ovations. He turned everything America mocked into ammunition, and his height didn't make him small, it made him defiant. Mickey Rooney topped the box office from 1939 to 1941, and MGM basically treated him like a walking ATM. At 5'2", he looked like the star who forgot to grow up, so scripts leaned into his boyish charm until he actually aged. One critic sneered that Hollywood had bet millions on a kid who barely reaches a woman's shoulder, and his personal life was just as brutal. He had 8 chaotic marriages, including a brief one to Ava Gardner, who reportedly joked that Rooney was small in more ways than one. Gambling and public humiliation led to his downfall, and the image of him drunk on a Las Vegas curb with empty pockets sealed his fate. Life magazine called it the fall of the Hardy Boy, proving that Hollywood loves you when you're cute but has no plan for you once the laughter fades. Burgess Meredith was never physically imposing, but his weapon was a booming voice capable of cutting through any theater. In the late 1930s, critics loved him, and studios respected him, but Hollywood panicked when the Red Scare hit in the 1950s. His name floated into the wrong rooms, and Variety lines described him as a political dwarf once the studios dropped him overnight. He survived on scraps and radio commercials for years, selling detergent with the same powerful voice he used on stage. The talent never left him, and when he returned as Mickey and Rocky, he roared back into pop culture after decades of being ignored. He proved that the town can make you small without touching your height and still expect you to say thank you when you're allowed to stand up again. George Raft looked like he stepped out of a back room where tough things actually happened, and his off-screen edge became his brand. Hollywood loved his authenticity, and the fact that he was friends with Bugsy Siegel and Lucky Luciano made him feel dangerous. He thought his mob connections made him untouchable, which gave him the confidence to turn down the lead role in Casablanca in 1942. Raft thought the script wasn't violent enough and passed the role to Humphrey Bogart, who became an icon while Raft's influence faded. He didn't just say no to a movie, he said no to eternity and spent the rest of his life as the guy who missed his chance. Believing he was too tough to miss that door proved to be a brutal lesson in how to lose everything. Buster Keaton was shorter than danger at 5'5", but he built a career by standing where no sane human should stand. Walls fell inches from his head, and trains chased him, but he never flinched and dared gravity to do its worst. His childhood training in vaudeville involved his father throwing him across stages like a prop, which taught his bones how to survive terrifying falls. He became a silent era god until MGM took creative control and restricted his stunts, which drove him to drink heavily. On one set, he was reportedly so drunk they had to tie him upright just to finish a shot. He survived stunts that should have killed him, only to be slowly crushed by the industry he helped build. Peter Lorre didn't need to raise his voice because his eyes did all the work, even though he was short and permanently nervous-looking. In 1931, his performance in M terrified Europe, and Hollywood immediately decided he would be evil forever. He became a specialty tool for villain roles, and critics noted that his menace came in bulk packaging despite his small body. Off-screen, he became trapped by typecasting and turned to morphine as a necessity, leading to rumors of shaking hands at the Chateau Marmont. Hollywood loves frightening characters, but not frightened people, and they quietly backed away as his health declined. When he died in 1964, the headlines ignored his survival and only mentioned the man who terrified millions. Sal Mineo never looked like a movie star built by a committee, and his performance in Rebel Without a Cause made him unforgettable. Standing next to James Dean, he didn't try to compete. He simply felt his emotions, and Hollywood mistook that for weakness. As he grew older, the industry grew uncomfortable because he was openly gay in an era when that wasn't allowed. The same town that once sold his pain now seemed annoyed by him, and his roles shrank until he was practically invisible. He tried to pivot to theater work where honesty mattered more than image, but Hollywood never stopped whispering about him. In 1976, he was stabbed to death in a dark alley just steps from his apartment, and the industry mourned him only briefly. His life proved that while Hollywood loves sensitive young men on camera, they have no plan for them once the filming stops.